Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City code consulting and expediting firm. Today, I have a special guest, an old friend of mine, Ed Stan from HLW. Ed?
Good to see you, Sisto.
Good to see you. So, in the world of back in my day at City College, I once had a professor who said, if you become an architect or you stay in the architectural profession, it's a very incestuous business. And lo and behold, I got an invite from you several weeks ago to come to an awesome event at HLW. Sorry if you weren't invited, but it was a great event talking about architecture on campus in college life here in New York City. And you had John Puglisi from Fordham, who's a client of ours, and I believe you had
Rich Letty.
Rich Letty from Hofstra, right. Tremendous guest, and you became a guest.
I became a guest.
You did, and the panel was really great. And lo and behold, you sent me an invite. I came to the event, which again was fabulous, and we got to talk a little bit about architecture. We got to reminisce about some projects we worked on many, many years ago. And through Bennett at HLW, I've been speaking to him as well. We rekindled our relationship from a long time ago. So I invited you on the show, and thank you for coming and taking time out from your busy day. So today, the show's really to talk a little bit, or a lot, it depends on how much we have to say, about how the design of college campuses has changed. Because when I came to the panel discussion and I listened carefully, it's changed. Boy, I've been in this business a long time and it's changed. So I thought you would be an incredible guest to give our audience, tell us a little bit about what happened post-COVID, sustainability. There were so many different things that they talked about that made it sound that the architectural world and the design world for students, for campuses, for faculty has changed.
It's changed tremendously, but let me give you a little background. Bennett, who you know very well, he facilitated for us a higher education roundtable in 2023 at Rutgers University. And it was represented by New Jersey public institutions, NJIT, Rowan, Montclair State University.
All great places.
And Rutgers, obviously, and a surprise guest from Cornell. And the theme of that one was the demographic cliff. And fortunately for those institutions, they don't have to deal with that, the demographic cliff, meaning that the 18-year-olds who traditionally attend college, go on to college, their population number is declining.
Yes.
And that has impacted a number of institutions to the point where either they're closing,
right,
or they're merging, or they've had to pivot to STEMs, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Pretty important subjects there. And
sure.
Each one of the universities had a really good point as to how they're dealing with it.
Because they're all selling their education on a different way.
They're selling their education in many different ways. Some of them are doing it online.
Of course.
Some of them are trying to attract international students. Others are trying to attract different religions.
Sure.
And others are trying to get the non-traditional students, meaning those that are in their 30s, 40s, possibly 50s, who want to make a switch in careers or looking for a way to advance themselves.
You bring up a great point. I remember this question specifically about 15 or 18 years ago. A colleague of mine said, hey, we got this resume. What do you think? And I looked at it and said, person seemed very qualified. And then at the end it said education. University of Phoenix, online. And we laughed. Really? We're going to hire someone? And now they were brilliant. They were like at the head of it, saying, hey, you don't have to come here. We can educate you. And I thought, for me, and I'm being perfectly honest, that's part of why I love doing this, is that I'm allowed to express my opinion about how I was naive towards it. And now we go back, and one of the things we talked about was I clearly remember at City College that one of the things that John had brought up was that back in the day, every professor had to have an office.
That is correct.
They were always in there.
Yes.
Right? Now, he was like, we can't give every professor an office because they're never here.
That is correct. Many of the professors have other professions.
Right.
They are also part-timers, and that becomes a question as to whether or not you provide a part-timer with an office. And in the academic world, the bigger your office, the more important you are.
Correct.
And part of the difficulties for a design professional is trying to convince the clients that perhaps instead of giving everybody an office, you create a bullpen or a common touchdown space.
Right, so you just go there and use that space. So, that's part of the show that I wanted to get into was to talk about how designing for colleges has changed. So we just hit on a topic, right? We hit on the topic of, okay, I'm, Professor Martello and I want an office, and I'm Professor Stan and I want an office. And everybody wants an office, but now as an architect, your job is to say, okay, but we want to utilize this space as best we can. Since they're only here once every 2 weeks, maybe we make what? So tell us what that what is, because I'm not sure everybody knows that.
So touching on the theme that we were talking about a little bit earlier, unfortunately, it's about revenue, and colleges need the revenue. We design many lab spaces, and it's to appease or to satisfy the needs of a private investigator, because many of these PIs, specifically labs, get government grants, federal grants. So if you bring in a PI who's going to bring in $10, $15 million grant, obviously you're going to pay attention to that person and provide them with what they need. If the person is an adjunct, a part-time professor, the needs are slightly different.
Correct.
The issue with many universities is they want to keep their utilization rate. Utilization meaning if this is a classroom, how many hours a day, how many hours a week
Can it be used?
Can it be used? And if a space is very specific, and let's just use wet labs or even some dry labs, they're only used 2 or 3 hours a day.
Right.
And they're very expensive
Correct.
rooms. So what a lot of the universities are trying to do is come up with these very flexible spaces that try to accommodate many different needs with different layouts using movable furniture, movable chairs,
Movable walls.
movable walls, operable walls. Yes, the ones that fold against the walls. Or
that we
those,
thought were
or fold up into the ceiling.
right.
So there are many ways of doing this. The issue with these flexible spaces is you have to make some compromises, and the compromises could be acoustics. It could aesthetics, yes, and it could also be not the ideal furniture that you need in that space, be it chairs or tables or support tables. The other item is that if the room is for a classroom in one situation at 9 o'clock, but at 11 o'clock, it needs to be a different configuration.
Who's doing it?
Who is moving those chairs and tables around?
That was what both gentlemen spoke about. Like, yeah, it's great for the university, but the labor that it takes to get it cleaned up and put it back in order, and all of those things, cost money. But what I got out of the round table was flexibility's big.
Flexibility is very big.
Really big. And that was quite different than back at our days when we were working together at St. John's, where St. John's would say, look, this is going to be the law school. This is what we want. This is what we need. We want it to be, a courtroom that we could use that way. Now they're saying, okay, Ed, you're the architect. We need it to be a courtroom. We need it to be an arbitration room, and we need it to be a classroom. How do you figure this out? How do you make all this furniture move? How do you make the setup move? How does that work?
As you were speaking, I have to laugh. Back when I attended parochial school on the Upper West Side, we used to sit at these wood desks and chairs that were bolted down to rails.
I went to parochial school too,
right,
in Queens, in Astoria, St. Francis of Assisi.
Yeah, Holy Name of Jesus, Upper West Side.
There you go.
So how does an architect deal with this? What we have to convince the client is now we need additional storage room because you have to put those tables and chairs away that are
Gotcha, makes
specific
sense.
for something. So if it's a classroom,
Right,
somebody
because the ones that were bolted down in the parochial school, they were removed.
exactly, and that's why I bring that up. So if a room is going to be a teaching lab, obviously the teacher up front layout is good. If it's going to be conversational, the chairs in a U shape or a circle shape would be appropriate, but somebody's got to lay this out. And then if it's going to be a dance studio,
Right.
you
It's a
got to
whole
move.
different
You
thing.
got to move everything out of the
Well,
way.
You know, to me, it's so intriguing about how the world changes, and yet we look at colleges and institutions, and they always look like they're stuck in time in certain ways.
Correct.
Right? You go up to City College, where I went to school for architecture, and you go past Shepherd Hall, and it's still there,
Yep.
and it still looks the same, and Baskerville still looks the same, but inside it's been through so many renditions of what has changed over time.
Right.
And even now, we look back and we go back to projects that we've worked on at St. John's, at Pratt, you named it, we've probably worked there, Fordham, wherever, Columbia, Barnard, all of those places, we sometimes have renovated them because we've been in the business for 40 years almost, 2 or 3 times to accommodate that. And that gets very, very expensive.
It gets very expensive, and sometimes you have to question yourself, did I do this correctly? But there are certain things you cannot anticipate. We could not anticipate COVID.
No.
Right? And then the slow leak of people and students and faculty coming back. There are some people who went back to the campus but did not go to classrooms. How do you accommodate them? So the example is they put in the flat screen TVs, they put in cameras focused on the professor, and the cameras focus on the students.
Right.
Plus some closed caption, other things, right? But the question then becomes on the operational side, who does that?
Well, and I think, and again, getting back to the round table again, I thought that both gentlemen did an incredible job because when we were first talking about it, like I was focused in on the architectural portion of it. Like, wow, this is so cool. They're going to put up cameras. They're going to do this. They can do it from anywhere. A student could be in Italy or he could be in Spain or he could be in South America visiting his family and still be able to go to class for a couple of days. And then both gentlemen brought up, but hold on a second, there's a price to pay for this.
That is correct.
And that is called, hey, they cut our budget on the operation side because they're spending money here. Enrollment is down, but now we need more hands to appease all of these other things. So, as an architect, you're trying to make it aesthetically pleasing. You want the students to have a great experience through an HLW building,
Right.
but yet you're dealing with the finance, you're dealing with the operation portion, you're dealing with all of that. And when I left there, I was like, wow, this is a lot more difficult than I think it used to be.
It is a lot more difficult, and part of the education, your educational experience, and you just brought this up, is in the classroom, but also the conversations, the people you met with that took place in the corridors. At Higgins Hall, at Pratt Institute, everybody congregated by that black staircase.
Always.
Because that's where everybody
We
hung
worked
out.
on Higgins after the fire.
Right.
So Pratt is still a good client of ours. I actually spoke to Chris Gavluck the other day, and what were we talking about? They need flexibility.
Yes.
They want to do a program. They can't move that program somewhere else so that they can go there. So we talk about what can we do within a certificate of occupancy? What can we do to accommodate the professor? What can we do to give the students still a great experience, but yet do it by the law? So, I've always said this to you, Ed. We've had this conversation offline. Is that a lot about my show is about dealing with construction codes, zoning. That we're proponents of all. You can't just take a space and put 150 students in it and say, okay, well, we achieved our goal. No, you created an illegal situation.
No, yeah, exactly. And as architect of records, one of the first things we do is go see the existing space,
Sure.
understand the lay of the land. But the second thing we do is do our zoning analysis and building code analysis, because one of us needs to sign off on these drawings.
Of course, and we want to, and you have an obligation that you're the professional to the university, to the students, to the building
To
department.
the general public,
Absolutely.
the health, safety, and welfare of everyone. So it's pretty important.
It is, and thank you for that. So the second piece that I'd like to share with you is I went up to the SCUP convention. It was my very first time there, and it was great to have the background of a code consultant and a zoning consultant, but yet still have my architectural background. And a common theme that also came up at your roundtable was this passage for the students, for the campus to have this main draw, this experience for students to walk through the campus and have this direct path and not have all this confusion. So tell us where that's evolved, because I go to Pratt all the time, right? And it's one of my favorite campuses. But at the same time, I feel like when I walk through the four gates, I'm like I'm in kind of like this fort. But yet when I get to the middle part is beautiful, and then it gets fragmented really quickly.
Right.
So that's not a knock on Pratt. That's just called we don't have enough space, right?
Correct.
So even so one of the a shout out to DBI, Ofer Odad did a presentation about their project at Pace. And one of the things that they did, they talked about being able to sit in a classroom, even though the campus was, not connected, but having a visual look to the other buildings. So tell us a little bit about that concept.
It's a great concept because you want to show spaces that are activated, that people are using the spaces. It gives certain people a level of security. It also satisfies people's curiosity. A lot of the classrooms nowadays are having some sort of glazed partition or storefront in the corridors because of one, for security. Second is for recruitment of either students, the parents who are going to pay for the students.
So when they're walking through, they get to experience it.
Right.
And the game changer there, which, several years ago from a code side was back then we used to, and you and I dealt with it where we had a stare and we're like, well, sister, we don't want to put this 2-hour partition. We want to do it in glass. We're like, okay, Ed, you got to use this glass.
Correct.
And then you go and you look and you're like, oh my God, it's $1,000 a square foot. We can't do it.
Right.
But now that technology has gotten better and it's being able to be used. So if you need a 1-hour wall, we can do it, where in the past, the code didn't allow it.
Right, and it's becoming more acceptable. It's become more affordable. Still expensive.
But definitely. But there's like you said, if that's gonna convince a parent to pay $75,000 for their son or daughter to come to this school, then it paid for itself.
Right, and I've gone to plenty of universities where you see the CMU walls, and my first thought is, oh, wow, this is like a high school.
Right.
And with the low ceilings, with the lockers down
feels
the
like
corridor.
an institution.
Right.
Feels like I'm going to the hospital.
Exactly. So do you want to see that? Or do you want to see
Exactly.
the maker space? Do you want to see the robotic space? Do you want to see the IDF room that's blinking? Do you want to see all these bells and whistles?
And they can experience it through the walkthrough. So it becomes interactive versus it being peeking through, at Brooklyn Tech, we used to have to peek through the door,
Right,
That's just the way
right.
it was.
So the glazed partitions, whether it's the whole wall, part of a wall, it helps sell the space. But
So part of this visual that they're talking about as this new design, because even up at SCUP, other University of Massachusetts spoke about it, that when a student comes in or a parent comes in as they're visiting, there's this visual corridor. There's this, it's not, before it used to be like a winding path or a quad, but now they've been able through this visual to, so explain that like on a master plan level?
Well, for many reasons, including safety, but mostly for orientation purposes, you want to know where you are. If you're in Paris, you look up at the skyline and there is the Eiffel Tower. When you're in Midtown Manhattan, you look and say, oh, there's the Empire State Building. Oh,
Always.
right? It's always a focal point. It's already an orientation point. You know
Right.
where you are. I grew up on the Upper West Side. The Hudson River has always been part of my love. And the same for a college university. When you enter through the gates, if there are gates,
Yeah.
there's usually some sort of paved surface.
Correct.
And it reflects the personality of the university. Many universities put banners on them and they create an alumni walk or a memorial walk, and that leads you certain places. When you do get to the space, you want to know where you're going right away. There are some hospitals in uptown Manhattan where when I've gone up there, I have no idea where I'm supposed to go.
And it's funny that you bring that up, because one of the guests on a future show is a really good friend of mine, Katie Osborne from Via Collects, and her job is waypoints.
Yes.
And it sounds like this easy thing, and I go to the airport and go, oh my God, there's a million signs here.
Right.
But without her and an architect. And sometimes you say to yourself, well, there's too many signs.
Right.
And then other places you go and you go, there's not enough signs. But yet, through architecture, you can eliminate some of that signage. You can't eliminate it all. But like you said, orientation is so important. And that seemed to be a big focal point in the education world.
It is a big focal point, signage and wayfinding. We have an in-house group called Brand X, and that is their focus, and they've been very successful because there has to be a balance between architecture and signage.
Right. That's my point. There's got to be balance somewhere.
Right, and that's what they do, and which is also one of the reasons why when we lay out our spaces, we want to make sure you know where you are,
Sure.
and where you want to go, and everything is easy to read and direct. And for those that don't speak English, the graphics will explain to you where you're going.
Sure.
Just like when you land at an airport and you got to go, it doesn't matter what language you speak. The symbol, the logo tells
Correct.
you
It
where
tells
to
you,
go.
right. And that's part of our human nature, is to recognize something in any language that it's an exit sign. Like, I love to travel. I've been, all over the world. I just love it, and I get on a cruise ship. That's mostly what we do. My wife and I love to cruise. And you get, whether you're in Europe or you're in Saudi Arabia or the cruise ship uses the same ways because they know that they have repetitive customers like myself.
Right.
But yet, when you get to France, I was just in France, Portugal, and Spain. Same thing. You get in a room and you look and you know where the exit sign is because it's red or green. You're going to find it, right?
Right.
But it's not your language, but that sign,
Right. And
right.
when you land at an airport, you know what
You know where baggage claim is.
the yellow background means, and you know what the blue background means.
Exactly.
So similar to that in architecture, we do have to use signage and wayfinding, but we also lay out the spaces so that they are easy to find and they make sense as you walk through.
So I have a couple of more topics I'd love to talk to you about because I love talking to you, Ed. To me, this podcast is always about bringing in an old colleague or an old friend and being able to have a conversation with them. It's never scripted. You and I didn't sit there and say, okay, what are we going to talk about? We just talk,
Right.
and that's what makes architecture fun to me anyway. I hope it's fun to you because I know you have a passion for it. So one of a couple of requests that I've gotten recently from a code standpoint was, they want to convert some of their lecture rooms into gaming centers. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very interesting because what was really intriguing about it was that it was just like a theater. It had a big screen, the few that we looked at, and we've looked at a couple. So it was very interesting that it had a big screen, it had stations, and this university could play a game against that university. And it's become incredibly popular. And it, gives interaction with other students to do it in a place while they're on campus versus off campus. So they were thinking about the students that are living on campus, that if they're there, this is a great way for them to stay on campus, right? Because after class, if they want to, go to this so, we talked about security. We talked about it being open 24 hours a day. Is that good? Is that bad? And, acoustics, design, furniture, travel distance, exit. Are there more than 75 people? And I brought this up at SCUP around a bunch of architects. And it was funny what the response that I got, and I want to share it with you. One of them was an architect who said, so when I go visit these schools, are we going to show this to the parents? And he goes, and I was like, of course you are. You're going to put glass on it. You're going to show them how great this is, because that's what the kids want. And I say kids, adults want. That's our society now. It's a big thing.
It's a different curriculum.
It's a different curriculum. And he politely turned around and goes, so I guess that's what I'll be spending $70,000 a year for my kid to come. And I politely turned around to him and said, but he was doing that at home.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, yes.
So tell me a little bit about that. Have you, in your travels around the country, because obviously HLW does work everywhere. You're in New York, but you guys do work everywhere. Is that a new thing that's happening? Because we've seen it.
It is a new thing. And as I said earlier, some of the universities, liberal arts universities, have had to switch over to the technology, the sciences, the engineering, and mathematics.
Because that's what they want.
And that's what the demand is. And the idea of an education, what is the return of my investment? If I'm going to spend $75,000 in tuition, what am I going to make when I leave the university? It all comes into play in providing these spaces that are needed and that are requested.
Sure. So they get that feedback through the students. They know, look, my daughter went to Providence, and then she went to NYU. A lot of money.
Yeah.
Over $300,000 worth of education. She's a social worker. She makes $55,000 a year, and she loves it. She absolutely loves it. Her return on that investment is not very good, but her experience allows her to help others. So, when we get into that conversation, it's a very difficult one because, if I go to this law school and I don't come out making $300,000 a year, it was a disappointment. But yet, so as an architect, you have to think about all of those things because you're trying to keep the client. You're trying to figure a way to get, because colleges are a business, let's be honest. Right. I mean, they need students. Without getting funded, without parents paying tuition, they can't survive. I mean, they could go into, their endowments, but that's not what they do.
No, and someone recently asked me, how do we fix this situation where they can't attract students to the liberal arts? And I said, I'm sorry, if you want very wealthy donors, then you better switch over to the engineering or the mathematics or the business, because if you want your alumni to contribute,
right,
they got to make money.
Of course, and it's true of any profession, but there's no doubt that with AI, with everything going on in technology, we just talked about gaming, that there's nobody talking about, I work for a newspaper.
What's that?
Exactly. So that's changed. So I'd like to take us to a different part of it because it's always coming up at every podcast, and it comes up in a lot of conversations. Sustainability.
Oh, very important subject.
Huge subject.
Very important
And it means something different to everyone.
Right. And sustainability to us is, yes, obviously the health, safety, and welfare, but also how efficient the building is and how efficient the spaces are. And is it worth the investment, spending $1 million in a room or $2 million in a room? So the sustainability is many things. I'm old enough to remember the first Earth Day. And don't get me started on mass timber, which I think is absolutely beautiful. But I grew up where we're supposed to save trees and plant trees, and now you're asking me to build in wood.
And you and I, you live up in the country a little ways. I have a place way up in the country, and I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love to fish. I love to hike. I love to play golf. I'm always outdoors. and I drive up on 84 and on Route 17, and they are leveling acres and acres and acres of land, leveling beautiful trees, beautiful hardwoods. I mean, and just putting in these solar farms everywhere. And I say to myself, is that when we went to Earth Day when we were in college?
Yeah.
You know, so I honestly, it's never about politics. I just love our earth, and I love the trees, and I love the growth of it. But I look at it and go, wow.
Yes, I agree with solar farms. I'm not sure I would take trees down to put it
Correct.
there. If there is a asphalt parking lot, such as the one up in Croton where train passes,
Right.
yeah, put the solar panel roofs all over that.
Right, and so it has a parking lot and it has solar. It's got different. So one of the things that someone similar to John had said up at SCUP was, it's really tough when you go to the students and ask them what sustainability is, and the students say, "Well, where are we? What are we doing with the plastics? What are we doing with the garbage? What
Yes.
are we doing with this?" They never ask, "Well, what are you doing with the heating?"
Right.
And he said it in such a great way. He goes, "Some parts of sustainability are not sexy." So when you go to the board and you go ask for $100 million to pull all your steam piping out, to put in new piping, put in geothermal system to make it more efficient, for it to be more, sustainable from a maintenance point of view, from all of those things. They're like, well, how's that going to bring us more students? How does that increase our enrollment?
Right.
So as an architect, when that question gets posed to you, to an ed, how do you sell that to a Fordham and say, look, there is a balance?
There is a balance, but there's also our responsibility to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
100%.
We have to do that. One of the nice things that Fordham has done is they have a parking structure, 4 or 5 floors.
Yep.
And up
Been
on
there.
the top floor, it's solar panels.
Exactly.
And if you have a roof plan that allows you to put solar panels up there, please do. Obviously, you're not going to do so well on a slope roof
Right.
or something that has
But a
low
garage
slope.
got a flat roof anyway, and it's open.
Right.
So now it just becomes, an erector set with panels on it.
Right. With respect to disposable items, yes, it's
Big.
very big at every campus.
As
you
it
go
should
to,
be.
and as it should be, with specific hands for paper or for waste or for landfill or for bottles, whatever it is. The other big item is water.
Yeah.
Water is an extremely important because there are several things going on. One is if you're on a slope surface, where does all that water go to? Usually to the buildings at the bottom of the slope. And if they have a basement or a cellar, usually they are
Getting
flooded.
Correct.
And I've seen plenty of universities put up these floodgates or even sandbags to prevent water from going
Sure.
in. The second aspect is we need to conserve water. And if you can
Oh, without a doubt. Using water is a process. It starts in a reservoir in New York that I fish on way north. And you'd be amazed when you're hiking, you see these humps, and then you'll go to an interactive map, and that's part of the aqueduct.
Right.
That's coming from 100 miles away.
Right.
And then it goes to a water filtration plant, and then from there. Well, all of that costs energy. We have to use energy because it's, some places we got to pump it.
Right. It's not all gravity
It's
fed.
not all gravity fed. We got to filter it.
Right.
We got to add chemicals to it or whatever, chlorine or whatever they're putting in to make. So, every drop of water costs money.
It costs money, but if it's chlorinated, if it has some fluoride in it, it's good for us, as opposed to using bad water.
Right. So water is is another.
Very important, and plus, one of the things that we, as architects, try to do is stay away from asphalt spaces, such as parking lots, which is why we advocate adding trees either at the perimeters or at the
Sure,
aisles.
because they'll be able to absorb
And
the
then
water.
all the water that runs off has to be collected somewhere. So many universities are looking at bioswales.
Yeah, there was a really interesting project up at SCUP that I went to that they did at UConn. Amazing. When they showed the drawings of how much work it is to do those bioswales, but how efficient they are and how they could use that water again, and they use it for, for their watering system, and plus all their plantings. It was lush. It was really pretty.
It's really, really pretty. I was at Brooklyn Museum on Saturday, Sunday, and right next to it is the Botanical Gardens.
Oh, yep, that's our client.
And they have their own swales there, and they also have educational signage. This is how you collect stormwater.
Correct.
This
To
is-
educate people.
to
No,
educate
and
people.
that's exactly what they did up at UConn.
And right next to the entrance is the visitor center, and that has a green roof. And that inspired me so much that when I recently built a garden shed for my wife, I put in a vegetated roof.
That's great. I love it. So, Ed, as we wind down the show, a really dear friend of mine who gets quoted on this show, he's going to have to start paying me a fee. Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown.
Yes, yes.
You know Andrew. Andrew and I met several years ago, and we became really, really dear friends. And he's a friend of Bennett's as well.
Yep.
And I always say he's got the toughest job because he's got to tell people what something's going to cost before they even design it. And because they got to go fundraise or they got to figure out, hey, if we want to do 10,000 square feet of this lab, they say, can we build it for $800 a square foot? And he says, no, probably about 3,000, and the project gets crushed before it even starts. So, but one of his famous, what I call a famous line is, he has to always look forward, not backwards. So on this show, we always ask our guests, and it's not a trick question, where do you see the design of colleges in the future compared to what you've seen so far in your career? Like, what's the biggest thing that you think is what's your foresight of change going forward?
I see colleges taking on a role beyond the 18 to 20-year-old tradition. I see colleges being a resource for the community, either for gathering spaces, meetings,
Wow.
or for education. I see.
Which I think they could do a really better job with that. It always was, we're closed in, it's our place, and no outsiders. And yet there's places like NYU where they're very open to that because their campus is scattered and they really try to bring the community into their school.
It's a very urban campus. If you go up to Montreal,
Been there many times.
McGill, they have walls along the perimeters, but they're only 2 or 3 feet high.
Right.
Whereas other universities, they build concrete walls around them. to
Right. My
set-
son went to Catholic University. It was like a fort, around. And then by the Basilica, it was wide open. But the campus itself, you felt like there was a chain link fence around it. St. John's is the same way.
Right. And I also see college universities having the opportunity, and if the endowment permits, to bring up the neighborhood around them,
As they should.
which they need to do.
Sure. Well, that's a great insight. Well, Ed, it was such a pleasure to have
goodness.
a good half hour to talk to you. Always great to talk to a colleague that, to me, knows the education world and just loves it. I mean, just like you said, I'm off on Saturday and Sunday, and I went to the Brooklyn Museum. I went to the Botanical Garden, all iconic places, but yet we're always looking to see architecture. So to have
Always.
you on is
Always.
a pleasure.
Now, I do travel a lot, probably not as much as you, but every country
I know you do.
Every country I go to, or every city I can get to, I go to see the colleges and universities. I want to see what is going on, what the
And
trends are.
it's funny that you go that way, and for me, it's always been churches. It's always been basilicas. Through just being from it. My parents from Italy. My dad always taking me to these little towns, and every little town, the center of the town was a church.
Right.
So as I've gotten older, that has stuck with me. So when I was in France, obviously couldn't get into Notre Dame, but went to a whole bunch of other places. When I was in Portugal, when I was in Spain, when I was in, even, believe it or not, in other countries that the Catholic faith may not be the main faith, but there's always a church.
There's always a church. They're beautiful on the inside, or depending on the religion. Sometimes
Right.
they could be plain, but they're usually the tallest building.
Right.
And they always have a space in front of them because you
Near the
congregate.
plaza, right.
You congregate either in the plaza or you congregate in the inside, but they are social spaces. And we need to think of higher
I had
education.
I had the privilege to go to Abu Dhabi, to go to the mosque there.
Nice.
One of the most incredible pieces of architecture in the world. And if you ever have an opportunity to go there on a Friday afternoon and seeing 10,000 people praying in such an incredible space, just the volumes, just the way they put all of the, it is just an incredible experience. And I always talk about, as an architect, our job is to design a space that people feel like they had an experience.
Oh my goodness. You just reminded me of going to Istanbul and seeing the Blue Mosque, or seeing Hagia Sophia, or seeing the Suleiman Mosque. Amazing spaces. And they do it without statues.
Right.
They do it without
Very plain.
paintings.
Right. Whereas in, other places, and even I remember when I went to India, just getting to the gateway there, it was just amazing. But Ed, always a pleasure. I know I could talk to you for hours of all the places you've gone and I've gone, but to give us some insight on where the architectural world is in higher education is amazing. So thank you very much.
Oh, my
You're
pleasure.
always welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.